Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulil Kareem, amma ba'du, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And welcome back to another episode of Siratu Khatam Nabiyyin. I hope you're all well. Well, we're reaching a critical point, if you remember from the last episode. I'd left you in some suspense as to whether this would be the episode in which I would be able to start the seerah proper, so to speak, because as you know, those of you who've been tuning in and watching the last episodes, or the last, nearly 20 or so episodes, I've lost count myself. I hope you've been keeping count. We've now really progressed significantly, and we're on the verge of introducing Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And as I'm saying that, my tablet is now starting to play games with me, just to keep me on my toes, I guess, just to make sure that I give it the due respect that it is entitled to. Now, what we have been doing, so you might be thinking, of those of you who've tuned in for the first time, that hold on a second here, if we were on nearly 20 episodes or something, and what has he been talking about if he's not actually started the life of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Well, the answer to that is quite simple, is that, we had a number of episodes at the beginning in which we were sort of building the appetite, should we say, whetting the appetite. We were building the motivation, the driving force behind why we should get to know Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then go beyond that until we eventually love the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That was the sort of initial few episodes, if you recall. And then we've been setting the scene, the background. What's been going on in the Arabian Peninsula, who were the key players, what key events had taken place beforehand, what had gone on, and we'd really reached the verge of introducing Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We're now going to mention another few individuals, key characters who existed in the time of Jahiliyyah, as it's referred to, the time of ignorance, prior to the arrival of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which by definition suggests, and never mind suggests, states that the arrival of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam meant that the time of ignorance was over, knowledge had returned, because the opposite, the antonym of ignorance is knowledge, the opposite of darkness is light, and the light of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam would soon arrive on the surface of the earth, and it would not be extinguished as it was spread far and wide. So let me share these individuals with you, and before we then turn our attention, and possibly within this 35-minute segment, 25-minute segment, reach the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So one individual of notice is Imru al-Qais and Ibn Hujr al-Kindi, and he was the author of one of the Mu'allaqat. And those of you who've studied Arabic literature, particularly poetry, you'll be aware of this particular poem, and he's responsible for one of that. And I'm not going to really go into too much detail about what he did and where he was. It was just more a case of introducing him so that we're well aware of him. Another poet, another key sort of individual who lived in what's termed as the pre-Islamic period, or the time of Jahiliyyah, is an individual called Umayyah ibn Abu as-Salt al-Thaqafi. And it's been mentioned by Ibn Asakir that his name was Umayyah ibn Abu as-Salt Abdullah ibn Abu Rabi'a ibn Auf, and he was the son of Uqda ibn Iz ibn Auf ibn Thaqif ibn Munabbih ibn Bakr ibn Hawazin, and he was known as Abu Uthman, and some say as Abu al-Hakam al-Thaqafi. And he was a poet in the area of Damascus, present-day Syria, and he was a righteous man. He was a man of faith, but then he turned away, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes mention of him in Surah Al-Araf. Tell them of him to whom we brought our signs, but he passed them by, so shaitan followed him and he went astray. So he's another man of mention, or worthy of mention. And there's a tale in which he came across a Christian priest, which has been recorded by Ibn Kathir and other experts in the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But we're not gonna share that with you. Otherwise, to be honest, we're never really gonna start the seerah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam proper if we detail that as well. That, I guess, is an episode in itself. But suffice for today is just to make the introduction to him, so you're well aware of other individuals who existed at that time, and there were men of influence, and there were men worthy of mention. as we've seen already. But one person that I will mention to you, and you may have come across him, is Bahira the monk. And this individual you may know of, or if you've sat in gatherings, or if you've read books of the seerah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you know of this individual. And it was him who first perceived prophethood from Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When he went traveling with his uncle, if you remember, Abu Talib was one of his uncles, the father of Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, who then eventually Sayyidina Ali radiallahu became the husband of Fatima radiallahu anha, the daughter of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then they became the parents of Sayyidina Hassan and Hussein radiallahu anhuma. So what we see is that when he was with his uncle Abu Talib, he used to travel obviously for business, because his uncles were businessmen. And they would take their nephews with them, and in order to help and assist. And he was around 12 years old at the time. And what they would do is they would travel to Syria and bring their stock back from Syria back to Mecca, and then sometimes they would travel towards Yemen and bring that. So they were the two key areas, because Yemen had a close link, as we've already seen, to Africa. And because of this close link to Africa, and Africa was not as we see it now, Africa was a very powerful and a very rich, affluent country, or a continent rather, especially when we look at places like Abyssinia, which is currently where present day, not currently where, but it's where currently present day Ethiopia is. So when, and in Syria there was there was an opportunity to come across the Christians in particular, because obviously Christianity, Isa alayhi salatu came several centuries before Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and even though his teachings had somewhat changed considerably since his arrival, there were many individuals who professed the Christian faith who lived in Syria. Obviously the Holy Land, as it's referred to, is there, Bayt al-Maqdis, Jerusalem, and where all the three faiths have a link and all have a connection with that particular land. And so when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was traveling, obviously he hadn't declared his prophethood. He declared his prophethood sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he was 40 years old. Here he was 12 years old. He was traveling with his uncle. And when he got there, Bahira the monk, a man of insight, a man of religion, a man of piety, he noticed, he perceived something from him. And what he saw was, he saw a cloud shading him. So whenever he was, was looking at them, and they were, moving their camels, and they were sort of wandering around and walking around, he noticed that wherever Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went, this sort of cloud went along with him. And so he just was somewhat sort of interested in this individual. So he made food for them and he invited them as his guests. Now we're just mentioning this in place here, because this was again before the arrival of Islam as such, but we will mention in more detail when we get into the seerah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in great detail soon, inshallah ta'ala. And this account is mentioned by many. One in particular that mentions it is Imam Tirmidhi rahimahullah ta'ala, this account that took place between the two. And it is said that Ibn Asakir mentions that the Bahira lived in a village called Al-Kafr, and which was 6 miles from Basra, and this place is known as Bahira's monastery. And it said that he lived also in a village called Manfa, which is in the plain of Balqa, beyond Zaira. So he may also have been traveling if he was seen in Syria. So there's some difference of opinion as to where it is he actually resided. But I just wanted to, as I said, I'm mentioning key individuals, key points in the time of Jahiliyyah before Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam declared his prophethood. But that particular event, that particular account, we will see, as in the Bahira the monk, we will see in its rightful place when the Siratul Khatam Nabiyyin starts proper. We'll sort of move on. As I said, I could go into more detail on some other sort of events, but I'm excited as you are to see if we can in this episode make a start of the seerah proper. Will we get there? We'll have to wait and see. But I'm just going over certain points which I could have shared with you, but I don't think so. I'd rather just leave them out and pick them up when we go over them in its rightful place within the biography itself. So what I wanted to sort of move on to next really is to push on, whereas my notes finish, and talk about the building of the Kaaba. And that's something which is important. So we've mentioned as well the fatra. The fatra, as I've mentioned to you before, is the time period between two prophets. And it's usually the period in which there aren't any prophets which are in authority, that are not inviting people towards religion. And the ones that we've already talked to you already is that Isa alayhi salatu wasalam and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, between the two of them, no Nabi was sent, even though there was an opinion, a view that there had been the one man that we had mentioned, but this was a far view, not a view that is accepted by the majority, nor one that can be relied upon. So what about the Kaaba? Was the Kaaba built? When was it built? You know, it existed before the arrival of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We know that for certain. So what was going on? There is in a marfu hadith in which it says that it was Adam alayhi salatu wasalam who first built it. And a marfu hadith is in one in which it's related by a Sahaba rather than the who reports the words or actions of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, rather than the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself speaking them, and is coming on the authority of Abdullah ibn Amr. Ibn Lahiya is one of its chain of authorities, and he is an authority considered da'if meaning weak. So the most credible of statements, without any doubt, is of Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, that he was the first to build it. There are reports, obviously, that the first to build it were angels who came down and built it. And then subsequently Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, and then when the flood came, subsequently after Adam alayhi salatu wasalam was rebuilt, and then it was Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam. And then obviously the Arabs, when they took over, they had it built. We'll also see within the proper Siratu Khatamini, when it starts proper, that also Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself was instrumental in the building of the Kaaba. But if we take the version or the most credible of all statements, that it was Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, the Khalil of Allah, the true friend, the close friend of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who was the first to build it. And it's mentioned by Ali ibn Abi Talib that it was it collapsed, and then it was rebuilt by strong people. Then it fell down and was built again by Jurhum. Jurhum is the tribe, if you remember, that Ismail alayhi salatu wasalam married from. They were the ones who arrived after Ismail alayhi salatu wasalam and his mother had settled in Makkah, when Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam had left him. This was obviously after the building. That Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam and Ismail alayhi salatu wasalam built it. Then it collapsed after that, and then it was built by the tribe of Jurhum. Then it collapsed again, and then it was rebuilt by the Quraysh. And when was it rebuilt by the Quraysh? Well, the Quraysh, it says it was about 5 or so. Some have gone as far as saying maybe even up to 15 years before the arrival of Islam. So it's around that kind of time. And the Rasulullah at that time had become baligh, and he had become a man at that time. But again, we will discuss that event in its rightful place, because we've already discussed Bahira the monk. And Bahira the monk met Rasulullah when he was 12 years old. Here we're talking about the Kaaba being rebuilt, and if obviously Rasulullah was 40 years old when he declared his prophethood. The fact that some are saying it was 15 years ago when the Kaaba was built, before the coming of Islam. So 40 minus 15, I'll quickly do that in my head. What is that, 25? Yes, of course it is. It's 25 years, and if it's wrong, I'm just checking you. So it's 25 years old, so clearly it'll become baligh. And if we take the lesser of the two values, which are 5 years, then it was 35 years old. In both cases, a mature man, and a man who had now lived in the world for a significant period of time and had become well experienced with the world. Another individual is Ka'b ibn Lu'ay. He's one that's been mentioned, and he was again somewhat much of a poet, and it says between his death and because he was he mentioned something, and this has been recorded, and I'll share the poetry that he had recorded. He said, you know, day and night, every day has a happening, the same to us, whether by day time or by night time. They both bring events when they arrive, and their coverings over us bring many blessings. The Prophet Muhammad will come unexpectedly and bring such news. Believable indeed is their bearer. And then he would say, by Allah, were I but would I but part of them hearing a sight, and I would rise like a camel and charge in there like a stallion. Meaning what he's saying is that if I was alive at the time when this prophet would come, then I would also partake in his work with him. And he's saying that when Ka'b ibn Lu'ay died, and when Rasulullah became declared his mission, declared his prophethood, there was around 560 years approximately. So he'd already made the prophecy of Prophet Muhammad arriving on the face of the earth well in advance, centuries in advance in fact, about his arrival. So you can see already that it's not just excuse me, it's not just Isa alayhi salatu wasalam who had made the prophecy of the arrival of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We're seeing that individuals who had insight and possibly men of religion, men of piety, who would also prophesy the arrival of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We saw, for instance, here when Ka'b ibn Lu'ay made that sort of prophecy. We've also seen, even prior to that, where individuals like Bahira the monk saw something in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that nobody else could see. We even saw, if we go all the way back, the soothsayers that were sort of predicting the arrival of a man that would bring to the end of the power that this king had possessed, and that was also prophesied some time back. So we're beginning to see, even prior to the arrival of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, quite clearly the arrival of this great man that would bring about great change, and that's where we have it with that. Another interesting point and a key point is also the Zamzam. Now we know, and most of us are told by our mothers and by our ustads in Maktab about how the Zamzam was found, how Ismail alayhi salatu wasalam was sort of kicking his heels, and an angel as well was involved in scraping the ground and water came out. His mother was running between Safa and Marwa, looking across as she reached the top of Safa, seeing if there was a caravan or anything nearby so she could sort of call them over and give them some food and water, because the food and water are finished. And as she's running, and the child goes quiet, and then she has a quick look to see what's happened, and she notices that water is there. So she brings the earth together, Zamzam, Zamzam as she's saying it, and it contains the Zamzam within there. But the Zamzam then did disappear for a while. So who was it that found it? Well, Muhammad ibn Ishaq mentions that Abdul Muttalib was sleeping in the Haram, and when he was sleeping in the Haram, he had a vision. And the vision that he had was to dig up the Zamzam to rediscover the well. So it's mentioned that Abdul Muttalib was the first to begin digging it. This was according to and related to by Yazid ibn Abu Habib al-Misri, from Marthad ibn Abdullah ibn Yazani, from Abdullah ibn Dhurair ibn Ghafiqi, that the last mentioned Abu Talib radiallahu anhu said that Abdul Muttalib had been ordered to dig the Zamzam. Ali radiallahu anhu reported that Abdul Muttalib was saying, I was sleeping in the sanctuary when a vision came to me and it said, dig Tiba. And he said, but what's Tiba? And I asked, but at that time it vanished. So what he did was, next day I went to bed again and slept, and this vision came to me again, and this time he said, dig Bara. So I asked, what's Bara? So again it vanished. So the next day again I went to sleep as I had done the 2 nights before, and again it came to me and it said, dig Al-Madnuna. So again I asked, what's Al-Madnuna? And again the vision disappeared. Next day again I went to bed and I slept, and again this vision came to me and it said, dig Zamzam. So I said, what's Zamzam? And this time he did respond. He says that it will never fail or dry up, and it will water the pilgrims, and it lies between the dung and the blood near the nest of the crow and the white leg and the ant's nest. So he was given some explanation as to where he would find it. And we know now when we go for Umrah and we go for Hajj, you find that you will always be able to bring Zamzam water no matter what. And you think how many millions of people have been there drinking this Zamzam water for all these centuries, yet it's still there, exactly as it was mentioned, that it will continue to stay there. So Abdul Muttalib did as he was told. He took his axe the next day and went off with his son Al-Harith. If you remember, this is one of the sons of Abdul Muttalib, and at that time he was his only son. And he started to dig for it, and he was looking around, and when he found it, they said, oh Abdul Muttalib, that's the well of our father Ismail, and so we have a right to it, so make us partners with yourself. And he said, no, this I was specifically assigned to this without you. This was something that I was tasked to do, so I will keep this for myself and I will be responsible for it. And as a result, that's how it came. So we see here now that this was a rare gift that was given to the family of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that the first time around Ismail alayhi salatu wasalam found the Zamzam. And again, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's lineage, his genealogy goes through Ismail alayhi salatu wasalam. And then Abdul Muttalib, which was his grandfather, was a man who found the Zamzam well again. So we can sort of go into a little bit more, but I think that kind of gives you the sort of surrounding information regarding Zamzam and how it was found by his grandfather, by the grandfather of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abdul Muttalib, and he was given these visitations in order to dig up this well, which he did, and he found it. And Zamzam, I can mention a few things too. That Zamzam itself is a rare spiritual water. It's rare. We sometimes use the word holy water. It does possess barakah. This is one thing that Muslims do believe in. This concept of barakah, which is difficult to measure, difficult to determine, difficult to understand, and as a result, because you can't see it, you can't feel it, it's a belief that we have, and it's an inherent spiritual energy, inherent spiritual gift that exists within Zamzam. And whatever the person drinks Zamzam for, he makes a dua for it, and then he will be able to request that, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshaAllah ta'ala, will accept that dua that is asked for. So we sort of, couple of more things that we want to mention, and I glance at the time, and I know I still have some few more minutes. I'm hoping that I will be able to get to that point, but maybe not so, maybe not today, maybe it's going to be the next episode, but let's see. Another one is Abdul Muttalib he made a vow to sacrifice one of his sons. That's an important point as well. Remember, Abdul Muttalib, the grandfather of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this was something else he had to do as well. It is claimed, Ibn Ishaq mentions, that when Abdul Muttalib received opposition from the Quraysh over digging of the Zamzam that I already mentioned to you, he vowed that if 10 sons were born to him and who grew up and protected him, he would sacrifice one of them for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the Kaaba. And we know already that wish that he made was achieved. He did have 10 sons. We've already mentioned them to you: Al-Harith, Al-Zubair, Hajjal, Dhirar, Al-Muqawwim, Abu Lahab, Al-Abbas, Hamza, Abu Talib, and Abdullah. So obviously when he gathered them all together, he told them what vow he had made, that look, I had made this vow that I would sacrifice one of you, and obviously that's what I need to do, and this is what I need to go ahead. So he assembled them and he told them, and he asked them to honor his pledge. He says, look, I know you're going to feel that this is not fair, and you're not going to be too happy, but this is the vow that I made. And they all said, they said, we're going to obey you. A very similar tale, if you remember, between Ismail alayhi salatu wasalam and Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, where he didn't in that case make a vow. This was a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to determine his love that he possessed. The most treasurable, the most loving item, the most beloved person to Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam was his son. We all know the story, how after great length of time he was blessed with a son, yet he was more than happy to sacrifice the most dearest thing to him for the sake of Allah, to prove that, Ya Allah, you are more dearer to me than anything in this world. And we see a very similar episode taking place here, that when Abdul Muttalib had made this vow to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Ya Allah, if you bestow upon me 10 sons who will grow up and they will protect me and look after me, then one of them I will sacrifice in your name. So they did so, and he went with them inside the Kaaba to where the Hubal, if you remember the god Hubal, that was there. And there was a well, and this is where it would be. So what he did was, there were 7 arrows which they would use for divining, basically a judgment over a matter of some issue, blood money, kingship, or something of that nature. And basically they would come to Hubal to basically seek a resolution, accepting whatever Hubal had said. So when he came to seek judgment from the arrows of Hubal, because they were basically randomly selected, then what happened was, the one with the name of his son Abdullah came forward. Now obviously when the name of Abdullah came forward, he was his most youngest son, and also he was the one that he loved the most. So he was in a conundrum. He was in the same conundrum that Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam was with Ismail alayhi salatu wasalam. And he had a decision to make, that look, I have a vow to keep, and that vow that I've kept means that I have to slaughter my son, and the gods, obviously Hubal, has chosen Abdullah, my most favorite, my most beloved son, and I have to now carry out this out. And again, we can draw similarities and parallels with Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam, where Yaqub alayhi salatu wasalam had to not sacrifice, he didn't do it by choice, but his son was taken from him, his most beloved son, and he sort of didn't see him for, according to the narrations, around 40 years before he saw him again. So we're seeing these great tests that these people have gone through. And as he is now, he's making this decision. But what happened? Well, what happened is we've run out of time. That's what's happened. We would have liked, I was hoping that we would get to introduce and start on the Siratul Khatam Nabiyin proper, but again we have run out of time. Does Abdullah become slaughtered? I guess you already know that's not going to happen, because Abdullah is the father of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he hasn't got married yet. So I guess you can already predict that. But what did happen then? If he didn't slaughter him, did he refuse? What happened? Well, for that, you're going to have to tune in again, and then we're going to discuss in very succinct and summarized version the marriage of Abdul Muttalib's son Abdullah to Amina bint Wahb ibn Zuhriya, and then I would say we will be in a position to start the life, the seerah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam proper. So we didn't make it this time round. Not to worry, you can join me again for the next episode, in which we will just finish off this last part of the events leading up to the birth of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And once we've completed these last 2 points, one is his marriage in very summarized version, and one was his father's test and his grandfather's test, the slaughter that he had promised, the vow that he'd made. So I hope you can tune in again to the next episode, which I will be able to disclose that to you, and also then start the actual asal, the real, the proper, with the background done and with the motivation in place, Siratul Khatam Nabiyin, the biography of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I hope you can join me again. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.